Hey guys, Mr. Wilson, Anatomy. This is Chapter 8, the Muscular System. And let me get my little stopwatch rolling here, and here we go. Um, so muscles, we need muscles to move our body and to move things within our body. So it mentions here um, muscle tone, which is what sort of keeps our posture, propel body fluids. Muscles are used to move blood through the body and food through the body. The heartbeat is from cardiac muscle, and our muscles generate heat that helps keep us warm. Three types of muscle tissue. We saw this in Chapter 5, skeletal, smooth, cardiac. Remember, skeletal is striated and it's voluntary. Smooth muscle is not striated and it's involuntary. And cardiac muscle is striated, involuntary, and it has intercalated discs that connect the cells. Let's skip to the diagram here. So a big part of this chapter is understanding the organization of a muscle. So a muscle is an organ because it's got multiple tissue types. It's got obviously muscle tissue, but it also has epithelial tissue, and it has nervous tissue, it has connective tissue in the muscle as an organ. So the whole muscle is surrounded by a connective tissue layer called fascia, and or fascia. I pronounce it different ways every time I say it. And that covers the entire muscle. And then underneath of that, you can see that shows that peeled away. There's lots of different connective tissue layers that surround each layer of the muscle. So the muscle's put together a lot like a rope, how a rope would be braided with bundles of threads, and each thread has structure to it. A muscle is a similar kind of organization that way. So the muscle would be like the rope. The fascicles would be like the bundles of threads that are braided together to make a rope. And each thread would be like a muscle fiber. Muscle fiber is also called muscle cell. You'll see those terms interchangeable. Inside of the muscle fiber, there's even more organization. There are myofibrils, which are these smallest bundles that you see right here on the screen, and then inside of a myofibril there are thick and thin filaments, myofilaments, that we will learn about later. So those connective tissue layers I mentioned before, the epimysium covers the entire muscle, the perimysium covers each fascicle, and the endomysium covers each muscle fiber, each cell. There's some other structures labeled here, that are important. Sarcolemma is a special term for the muscle cell membrane. The sarcoplasmic reticulum is a special term for the endoplasmic reticulum of a muscle cell. And if you remember from biology, endoplasmic reticulum is sort of a network of membrane tubes that transport stuff. Mentioned all of that already. Those thick and thin filaments, the thick ones are called myosin, and the thin ones are called actin, and they are arranged in alternating patterns that produces the striation. So that's why they look striped. It's because of the arrangement of those filaments. We'll talk about troponin and tropomyosin later. All right, so in a myofibril, so we've zoomed in now to the skeletal muscle fiber, and we've pulled out one myofibril to look at the units that actually cause contraction of a muscle. And each unit is called a sarcomere. It's a length, it's almost like a link in a chain as a unit, and that's what actually contracts. A sarcomere shortens, and adjacent sarcomeres all shorten, and eventually that causes the muscle itself to shorten and to pull on the bones, and that's what generates the movement. So the boundaries of a sarcomere are called the Z-line. And I can remember that because they make a zigzag pattern, and they're called the Z-line. So one sarcomere runs from a Z-line to the next Z-line. The Z-line is connected to the thin filaments, and the thin filaments are the actin filaments. And where there are only actin filaments produce a light-colored band, which is called the I band. And again, light has the letter I in it. That helps me to remember. In the middle of the sarcomere is the myosin thick filaments, and the area where the thick and the thin filaments overlap is the A band. That dark area is the A band. And again, the word dark has the letter A in it, and that helps me to remember that. Here's an actual photograph of microscope slide, and you can see the Z line, zigzag on each side. The light area are the I bands. The dark area is the A bands. And the light area is where the actin is. The dark area is where the myosin and actin overlap. And when a muscle contracts, these Z lines move closer to each other, and that's what shortens the muscle. Some more structural stuff here. The sarcoplasmic reticulum is arranged in units called cisternae, and again, it's tubes of membranes that transports material. And then there's also a different type of tube called transverse tubule that runs through adjacent myofilaments to connect the different myofilaments. Again, each muscle fiber is a cell, so you'll see those terms used interchangeably. And the reason it contracts, it's stimulated by a motor neuron. The axon of a motor neuron connects, not physically, there's still a space there, but connects to the muscle fiber at a space called the synapse. And inside of that neuron, there are vesicles, little bundles that contain neurotransmitters, which are the chemicals that cause the muscle cell to contract, and it releases those chemicals into the synapse. You see the terms listed here, and there's an illustration again that shows that. So we've got our skeletal muscle fiber down here. The part of the skeletal muscle fiber where the synapse is called the motor end plate, and then that's connecting to this axon of a motor neuron. It's going to send a signal down this axon into each of these axon terminals, and the neuromuscular junction is the term for this, what you're looking at here. It's where the neuron meets the muscle. And you can see inside, they've zoomed in, inside of the axon, there's lots of mitochondria. Remember, those are the powerhouses of the cell. And there's the synaptic vesicles with their neurotransmitters. They fuse to the membrane. This is exocytosis. Fuse to the membrane and spill out their neurotransmitters. In this case, it's acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter. It's into this synaptic cleft, the space between, and it's going to bond to receptor sites on muscle cell, and that's what causes contraction. Go Knights!